So this is our presentation by Brooke Mott, Nathan Zock, Emma Hastings, Andrew Osborne, and Lindsay Pinkerton. So our proposal was for new water for Lincoln, or otherwise known as water source alternatives for the city of Lincoln. So a little bit of a background. It's important to find alternative water sources for Lincoln. Lincoln's vulnerable because one of the main source of water is the Platte River. If something happens to that water source, it could be severe for the city and its residents by not having any water for an extended period of time. This was clear last spring when the flood came through and caused severe damage and problems throughout the state. The result was that Lincoln almost ran out of water, and conditions that might affect this again are global warming and extreme weather. This increase of heat and temperature could result in a drought and the drying up of the Platte River, which applies most of the water to Lincoln. There is also a longer growing season, with farmers irrigating and pumping water for longer periods of time, which could drain the water resources that cities and residents rely on. So it's important that Lincoln does find more alternative sources to back up the water supply to the city in case any of these worst case scenarios happen that affect and are endangered to water sources and supplies. So some of the goals we developed were finding new water sources for Lincoln using gray water and self-filtration systems, which aligns with helping Lincoln achieve several of the sustainable development goals developed by the United Nations in 2015. Particularly, they would help meet the following goals, being Goal 6, which is clean water and sanitation, Goal 9, industry and innovation and infrastructure, Goal 11, sustainable cities and communities, and Goal 12, responsible consumption and production. In regard to the clean water and sanitation, these solutions would increase water use efficiency, increase recycling and safe reuse, and improve community support and participation in water and sanitation management. For Goal 9, these solutions would make Lincoln's water infrastructure more sustainable and would promote innovation in related technology. These solutions also help Lincoln meet Goal 11, sustainable cities and communities, by increasing access to basic services, in this case, water services. Additionally, they help meet Goal 12 by helping Lincoln manage more water more efficiently and sustainability, as well as strengthening Lincoln's capacity to move towards a more sustainable future. So our sustainability considerations. This plan of alternatives takes into account many sustainability considerations, including the natural systems like our spheres and cycles. The hydrosphere and lithosphere are directly affected by the placement and change of water. Less water would be needed from our sources, and land may be changed by infrastructure. These same things have an effect on our water cycle by changing the water availability for natural systems, and the biosphere is the integration of life with the sphere and is influenced by water systems. The economic factors that we had to consider were things like the cost of implementing these systems, as well as the infrastructure, contracting people to plan and do the work, and the cost of maintaining as well. So this would influence things like the city budgeting and funds, taxes, and any policies that needed to be put into place to make this work. The equity and societal factors that were discussed is how these would influence these water supplies and if these would produce clean water or not. Also, to those systems, who would these systems be available to, and how would it affect the average citizen's water supply? And then finally, we thought a lot about how people would perceive the actions and if they felt it was worth it or not. So taking into account our stakeholders, one of the major primary stakeholders is the mayor, along with the local government. They are behind the resiliency task force and would make any decisions on a citywide scale. This makes them face the change, and it also would have to be planned for and budgeted, which could have higher costs and might divert tax funds from some areas. Water management workers are another primary stakeholder because any changes to Lincoln's water system or how things are run would go through them. They're also in charge of making sure that there is good quality water for Lincoln. And this could help protect against unexpected situations like the flooding this summer. And then also citizens are one of the most important primary stakeholders. They're the ones that are participating in the alternatives. There could be some imposed taxes or costs associated with the wide-scale system, and they would have some concerns with what it costs to put their homes and how much money it would save them in the long run. Continuing on with our next group of stakeholders, the Omaha MUD has a primary interest because they are talking about branching out and using some of Lincoln's water sources for their own. The possibility of Lincoln preserving water would affect them and the water they can use as well. Engineers, plumbers, and architects would be secondary stakeholders because these alternatives would bring more jobs for them, and they're the ones that are needed to make the ideas a reality, and their skill and ability would be directly linked to the success of the water reuse options. So, going on, we conducted a diagram that kind of explains this more visually. So, the group focused on water resources component of the sustainability task for Lincoln. We then decided that we would focus on water source alternatives. In order to understand water source alternatives more completely, we had to understand gray water and the water reuse as well as its systems, maintenance, and installation, and also the costs associated as well as the incentives and implications of adding these costs to taxpayers, businesses, and then finally the public acceptance of new practices and the outreach that goes along with that. So for our first alternative, we looked at the city of San Francisco, who implemented a laundry to landscape gray water reuse program, similar to what we are proposing for Lincoln. The program allows owners of residential and commercial buildings to use their laundry water to irrigate their landscapes. This program is not mandatory, but the city does offer incentives and rebates for people who apply for the required permits. Additionally, this program cuts back on wastewater entering the sewer system and reduces the amount of drinkable water used for irrigation. Our next alternative was the CSU Engineering building in Australia that produces its own drinking water from rainwater collected by roof catchment and then is stored outside the building. The water is filtered on demand at the water treatment plant that is located outside the building and then is powered by solar panels. So the water must be treated for various microbial and chemical contaminants from roofing materials, as well as other microorganisms. Chlorination is a common and affordable way to disinfect it, but may not be the best for very small operations. Other options are biosand filtrators or UV radiation. Small-scale RWH systems as backup drinking water is essential in conditions like drought caused by extreme weather. So for our second alternative, it focused on an office building in Exeter, UK that used an RWH system that stores the water and uses it for flushing toilets. The system works by starting with rainwater inlets that flow into an interim storage tank on the roof, and then water is pumped from a storage tank to a header tank and then fed by gravity to the point of use. It's a simple system with energy costs for a system that are minimal, and water saving efficiency turned out to be 87% across 8 months. So the tank was oversized for the building, and smaller results could have been reached through a smaller system. So looking into the pros for this proposal, the pros that are associated with the new water source alternative are as followed. First, the systems would allow the user to save money on their water usage as they are using water from their own supply, in which in turn is more sustainable as the water is being used multiple times. The systems are also fairly easy to maintain, whether they be applied on a large scale, residentially, or commercially. Then discussing the cons. The cons associated with the new water source alternative are mostly having to do with the current culture of residents as well as voters getting to realize the importance of sustainability. So the implementation of the systems would challenge the residents to understand and become comfortable with the use of gray water in their daily lives, especially drinking water RWH systems that must be properly filtered. Finally, the upfront cost to install these systems could be high. So moving on to our recommendation, is to look farther into gray water and RWH systems and then try to implement them into government buildings or renovations and new projects. This could be done by using systems for flushing toilets in large buildings or using them in smaller buildings, which could be more easily retrofitted to handle most of the water needed. Outside of doing this, though, incentives could be given for local businesses and companies, but most of all, these systems can be used on a house-by-house scale. So it's important to try and incorporate them to the city of Lincoln. For ethical approaches, as far as an environmental side, we support the utilitarian approach as far as the common good approach. We chose this because although there are many people that have a stake for how new, more environmentally friendly sources of water for Lincoln are found and used, more people will benefit from finding new water sources in the long run. But So, like for example, in March, when water supply in the Lincoln area ran low due to flooding around the state, it affected mass amounts of people. However, if more sources are available, such as gray water, this problem could have been more easily combated. So it's important to find new sources to try and help this problem out in the future. In regards to our environmental ethic, for the environmentalist side, to us would be defined as the outer natural world that includes outdoor living things such as plants, animals, and the natural parts of the ecosystems that are included in the world. This also includes processes that make the natural world that we as humans live in. The ethics side would be defined as the role humans play to sustain and take care of the environment by doing everything we can to help keep it healthy. So together, our ethic is to make the cleanliness and protection of the outside world that is provided by us humans. And so, altogether, what we took away from this was one, the residents are better served through water recycling because cities can conserve their water and there's more stable supply. Second, when you use gray water and RWH systems, our clean and drinkable water is not wasted on things we don't need. Third, our buildings and homes can significantly decrease water use from the public supply if these self filtration systems are put into use. And finally, trying to find more sustainable ways to obtain water for everyday citizens are actively working towards the Sustainable Development Goals created by the United Nations. And these are our references that were used and cited throughout our proposal.